Hello everyone and welcome to lesson 4.3b. This is going to be the last lesson regarding challenges that were facing Zimbabwe after their independence. So by the end of today's lesson, you should be able to describe the early successes that Zimbabwe had in the first few years after independence, explain how Mugabe became more authoritarian by 1987, and lastly, be able to explain the challenges that Zimbabwe faced after 1987. So on this first slide, we're going to talk about the successes and failures of the new government in general. Okay, so these are just going to be, like national overall arching successes or failures. And so the first one is that the new government successfully received aid from Scandinavia, and we're talking like Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark, so that area of Northern Europe. And they received about 900 million pounds worth. That's what that symbol is. It's the British pound. So about 900 million pounds worth of aid, and that's worth about 1.2 billion US dollars in today's money. Health and education services dramatically improved, a few years after independence. So this is a success. They embarked on infrastructure investments like building of roads and clinics. They also started working on fencing for farms so that farms can be better protected, against wildlife and whatnot. They also secured safe drinking water for 84% of the people. So this is a pretty good success rate, given the fact that the country was torn by war for many, many years. Sadly, on the flip side of the same coin, they do have some failures. In the first few years, first 10 years of being independent, they only had 48% of the industry in their country was owned by foreign individuals or by individuals. Or by foreign countries, or excuse me, yeah, by foreign companies or foreign or individuals by themselves. And so think about this: 48% of the industry. That means almost half of the industry in that country is owned not by someone in Zimbabwe or even a Zimbabwean citizen. Land redistribution was going very, very slowly. 1990, that was the year that the government could officially take white land. If you remember that, there was a 10-year requirement that you don't do anything with white land. 1990, you can now do that. So the Zimbabwean government, there were only about 52,000 families resettled because the Zimbabwean government had purchased this land from these white people, and they were intending to move people to go out there and farm. Well, only 52,000 families wanted to go out there. There's, some people, once they live in the city, they have no desire to go back into the country. Not everybody, but some do. And so some of the land that was actually given to some of these people weren't even suitable for farming. So it was like, well, thank you, but I can't even use this. Now we're going to shift our focus to authoritarian rule. So we're going to look at how and why, Robert Mugabe felt the need to become more authoritarian. So first of all, we need to focus on the ZAPU-ZANU rivalry because that's been going on for years. It's even the independence movement itself is an illustration of a rivalry between the two groups. Now, once Mugabe is solidly in power in 1990, he wants to establish a one-party state under his one party, and that is ZANU-PF. Remember, they do add the Patriotic Front to the end of it, so it's one party. But the problem is that Joshua Nkomo is in the way. So remember, he is the leader of the other group, ZAPU, and so he is in the way, and he does have significant support in certain regions of the country. And where the tension is going to come from is going to be, how in the world do you integrate Zipra and Zanla into one army when they were both fighting against the white minority government, but they were also technically on opposite sides when it looks at, these are rural people, these are urban people. So it's a weird dynamic here, and they're trying to merge them, and it's just not working. You have to remember that culturally, the ZANU and ZAPU were split culturally. That usually the Shona went with the ZANU and the Ndebele went with the ZAPU. And the Ndebele felt that the ZANU were going to put the Shona interest ahead of their own, and so they have rightful fears. Well, that didn't really matter that these people were fearful. They have every right to be, by the way, because Robert Mugabe is going to send a group of elite people to be trained by North Korean secret police. And this is going to be known as the 5th Brigade. And of course, it is led by the Shona. So this is everything that the Ndebele were worried about. They have every reason to be. Well, if you look over here, the Ndebele, they live in this particular part of Zimbabwe. Unfortunately and sadly, the Montebello land, this is Montebello land where the Ndebele people live, there's going to be a massacre over a 5-year period between 1982 and 1987 where Robert Mugabe and his secret police and military forces are going to massacre 20,000 Ndebele individuals in the Montebelloland massacre. And that's going to also result in 400,000 people that are going to become refugees and displaced as a result of these atrocities. So in our next step, after the Montebello land has tragically happened, it has ended, and Nkomo and Mugabe are going to sign something called the Unity Accord in December of 1987. Okay, so this is going to be the end of 1987, and they're going to be a Unity Accord. ZAPU and ZANU will officially merge into one political party called ZANU-PF. And Nkomo is going to be made one of the vice presidents. Well, how nice. That's just sweet. But here's the issue. The dude was already one of the vice presidents before the violence started. So basically nothing changed is what I'm saying. Well, December 30th, 1987, Mugabe is going to be declared officially the head of state, the head of government, and the head of the army. This is going to give him the power to do a lot of things. Dissolve parliament, declare martial law, and hold office as long as he wants to. So we have established an authoritarian regime. And continuing with our authoritarian look, the ZANU-ZAPU rivalry actually was bad for the white minority in the country, and the reason being is because ZANU, since they're the ones in the larger majority, and ZAPU really can't do anything to stop it or help them, ZANU used the state media and as propaganda to advertise that white people were racists. And so, I mean, it was daily, hourly. I mean, it was constant where the propaganda and commercials and things like that were constantly reminding people of that. And so, I mean, that's creating a lot of racial tension. And of course, white people, they still voted for the Rhodesian Front, and they still had 20 seats in Parliament because remember, they were disproportionate. They were given a disproportionate number of seats based on the Lancaster House Agreement, at least for a specified number of years. But here's the issue. In 1985, there were 100,000 white people left in the entire country. Only 100,000 people. There's basically 330,000 people in Washtenaw County, just to give you an estimate. And they got 20 seats in Parliament up until, I think, 1987. It's either 1987 or 1990. But I think it's 87. In the 1990 election, ZANU is going to win 117 out of 120 seats. I guess you can call that a majority. However, with the one-party rule, because, you know, it's kind of rigged to go in that way, there's discontent growing with ZANU. So as a result, you're going to see the creation of new groups, and one of them is called the Zimbabwe Unity Movement, nicknamed as Zoom, and it's led by this gentleman here, Edgar Takiri. And Edgar Takiri is going to be, you know, basically a sign of open resistance to Robert Mugabe, and then unfortunately, he is going to be arrested. You know, so as a result, Mr. Takiri is going to become a political prisoner. So by 1987, Robert Mugabe has officially become a full-fledged, for all intents and purposes, dictator and an authoritarian. So let's take a look at the challenges to democracy after, so we're going to look at challenges facing them after 1987. So let's look at threats to democracy. Well, ZANU-PF kept winning elections, but they were highly unpopular. I mean, it's weird, you know, no one voted for you. How did everybody in your party win? That's really what was kind of happening. The Movement for Democratic Change, the MDC, was created in 1999, and they actually did win almost half of the seats in the next election. So, I mean, you got to think, this one party won half of the seats in Parliament. As a result, they were openly harassed and terrorized afterwards. I'm talking, you know, in the Houses of Parliament in Zimbabwe, they would be, you know, verbally or, you know, it maybe ruffled up a little bit, but they were definitely verbally assaulted. They were threats made against their lives and family. because of the fact that they were opposition to Robert Mugabe and his ZANU-PF. In 2001, the government forced the Chief Justice off the court, which left it with a ZANU majority. Elections in the 1990s and 2000s were often violent. Every time they had an election, there were hundreds of people killed because there were open violence at polling stations and throughout the entire campaign. In 2002, the army actually threatened to step in because ZANU lost the election. So finally, ZANU-PF was defeated in an election, and the army said, if they don't go back in, we've threatened to use violence on the people of Zimbabwe. So you're seeing the military turn on the people. So in 2005, the MDC held support in most of the cities, and as a result, Robert Mugabe attacked them. So now you're seeing the president of Zimbabwe attacking another opposition group, which was the Movement for Democratic Change. And as a result of him attacking these people living in the cities, this left 2.4 million people are impacted by this turn on his own cities. I mean, Robert Mugabe literally emptied out Zimbabwean cities. This left 700,000 people homeless. And you got to think about this. This is on top of the original refugees we already had living, and homeless people living in this area to begin with. Now, taking a look at the issue of land. Remember, in the Lancaster House Agreement, it expired in 1990. So that means that Robert Mugabe is free to do whatever he wants to do with the white land, the black land. The entire country belongs to him. So Parliament is going to pass the 1992 Land Acquisition Act, where the government will purchase 1/2 of white farmland. Well, tensions are going to erupt afterwards because Robert Mugabe gave it to all of his followers. I mean, and you got to think, I mean, if there's farmland over in Montebello land where Ndebele people live, I mean, you know, you're moving Shona farmers out here. I mean, that's going to be a problem. Soldiers actually terrorized and destroyed white farms, which caused further economic hardships because white farms were the ones that were most productive because they were the ones that had the better machinery and whatnot. And so this caused further economic hardships, and it's going to be the beginning of some type of famine. You know, because the food is going to grow, is going to not be grown because they're destroying the white farms. And so large commercial farms that were largely owned by white individuals were taken down piecemeal. So what this means is they were taken down bit by bit. And so it was given to local farmers who had no training on how to use the equipment. So literally they would take these $1,000 worth of equipment and machinery out of these large commercial farms and give it to a local farmer who didn't even know how to turn the machine on or yet how to even use it effectively. And that was just silly. I mean, you're looking for it's an accident waiting to happen, and then of course it's not efficient because they don't know what they're doing. And then there's no backup plan for the white farmers. I mean, where am I supposed to go? What are we supposed to do? That's questions they're asking. And if they try to go back into farming, they're just going to be destroyed. And then there's injustice in land remaining, as best the land goes to Mugabe and his supporters. So any farmland that becomes available that is the highest quality, it goes straight to these groups here, ZANU or Mugabe supporters, period. End of discussion. So there's definite land inequity and land injustice going on after 1987 because of Mugabe's authoritarian rule. And lastly, we're going to look at economic decline and eventual collapse after 1987. And this is going to all come as a result of that authoritarian rule that Mugabe established. All of those achievements of the 1980s, gone. Remember we said there was that huge boost in the 1982, and then it was kind of stable in the 80s. Gone. All of it. Just out the door. In the 1990s, workers went on strike over poor working conditions because the government wasn't looking out for them at all. So the 90s were terrible. By 1987, the currency collapsed. What that means is that it went, the value just went down. Okay, so 1997, its value is collapsed dramatically. Throughout the 1990s, you're dealing with the AIDS epidemic, sadly, in Zimbabwe. By 1999, they had 1,700 deaths a week. Yes, 1,700 deaths a week from AIDS. in 1999. So, in addition to just, general homelessness and poverty for many, many people, you're also dealing with 1,700 people dying a week from HIV and AIDS. Then, when you look at it further, 3 years later from this, in 1997, the currency collapsed. Well, in 2000, the currency is worthless. I mean, literally worthless. I mean, there's nowhere on earth can you use a Zimbabwean dollar in 2000 that you could buy anything. It literally was worthless. And the food prices soared off the charts as foreign investment dried up because foreign governments were not wanting to deal with Robert Mugabe because he was, basically creating a humanitarian crisis and was a huge human rights violator. And so food shortages became more common. Unemployment caused people to flee the country because they're like, it's so unstable, we need to leave here. Eventually, by 2002, there were 3 million refugees living in neighboring countries. There were 3 million people that had left Zimbabwe, that had fled to Botswana, South Africa, Mozambique, Zambia, just to get out of the country. So there are literally 3 million refugees on Zimbabwean border that are themselves Zimbabwean. And there you have it. Lesson 4.3 has ended. So, can you describe the early successes of Zimbabwe in the first few years of their independence? Can you explain how Mugabe became more authoritarian in 1987? And can you explain the challenges that Zimbabwe faced after 1987 when Mugabe became authoritarian? If you can, pat yourself on the back. You are doing an amazing job. At this point, look for any activity for lesson 4.3, and this will conclude our lesson on Zimbabwe. Thank you so much for your attention throughout this lesson, and have a wonderful day.